Support comes from Sunday Morning Cafe, presenting Resilience and Creativity, a concert and interview with Royce Martin, creator of Swag Time, and resilience researcher Dr. Tom Wagner on August 2nd, sundaymorningcafe.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. If you're at home or at work and you've got a pair of headphones or earbuds around, pop them in. Or if you're tooling around town in your car, you might want to turn the volume up a bit. That's because our next conversation will help you understand a technological development that changed the way we experience sound. Take a listen to this clip of Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, brought to mass popularity by Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, to see if you can hear a sonic shift. I'll give you a hint. It happens about 12 seconds in during a crescendo. Did you catch that change? If you didn't, you're in good company because I didn't when I listened at first. But if you grab that pair of headphones or you're listening in your car right now, I'm going to move to your left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm going to meet you right back in the middle. My next guest is David McRennell. He's a local audiophile who will co-lead an event at the St. Louis Science Center's Sound-Centric Up Late event for adults 21 and up next Saturday, July 25th. He also created that clip of Also sprach Zarathustra for us and is here to share more about it and why it so dramatically shaped how we hear and listen to all sorts of media today. David, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
So David, that clip of the song we played, I understand it combines both mono recording and stereo recording. What else makes it special?
Well, that clip was the first stereo recording issued by a major label, so RCA Records in 1954. RCA and many other labels had been recording stereo for experimentally because they knew it was coming. And the first stereo format issued to the public was actually reel-to-reel tape. You could buy an album on a reel of tape. And this is not only the first one RCA issued, it is a very famous piece of music. And so what I did was I took the beginning and made it mono and then expanded it back out into its true stereo form to try and show people what and have them hear and experience what it was and then what it could become with new dimensions in sound that were offered by two-channel recording and playback.
Mm-hmm. So in simplest terms, you just mentioned two-channel. What is stereophonic sound? How do you describe it to someone who has absolutely no idea how they hear what they hear?
Sure. So in short, stereophonic sound is the ability to recreate depth and breadth in a recorded sound. Now, we take for granted the ability we hear someone standing on our left, we hear them standing on our left. If someone's standing on our right, we hear them from our right side, but we hear with both of our ears. Before stereo became prevalent, you had mono in the home, and I'm mostly presenting this event on home audio reproduction, and you had level and echo and you could just bring things louder or softer. Stereo allowed the ability to move things around and to create a more convincing sonic picture in the reproduced soundscape, which made music that was mixed and recorded for it sound more natural and spacious and a bit more faithful to a concert event than a single channel might be.
Mm-hmm. And just a note here, the microphones that we're using right now, these are set as a mono source. But we broadcast in stereo. So, for example, the music that people hear us play here on the show, like our new music episodes, which we just had one yesterday, is in stereo. Now, David, what did the advent of stereo do for people who are listening to music, especially at home?
Well, stereo, like I just referenced, stereo brought a new dimension in sound. It brought the ability to create a convincing sense of space and depth and breadth to the home that you would sometimes get in a concert hall or a any sort of music venue, whereas before you were kind of just constrained to a speaker in the corner. And it allowed people who got more creative as stereo technology kind of progressed out to the pop and jazz worlds to manipulate sound in the field left and right to create something that was completely artificial, but its own art form. Mm-hmm. And so people started using a technology and doing new things with it and creating new ways of bringing their art to the public because they had a new dimension in which to control their sound.
How did this become a topic of interest such that you can educate other people about it?
I really don't remember the first time I noticed that recordings sounded different. I can credit the fact that my mother did not control my access to her record collection such that it was, and I started noticing that different things sounded different, not just musically, but fidelity-wise. And I might have been 3 or 4 years old where I went, this recording sounds might have been dull or might have been bright or small or wide. And I had kind of unfettered access to a lot of things that someone my age, I'm 34, might not have heard, which is a lot of classical music and historical recordings that were in this box set that she had gotten. And just hearing those different things in my brain, I thought, well, why do they sound different? One says mono, one says stereo. What is all of this? And it just became a passionate interest of mine that has continued to this day.
Mm-hmm. Now, some people, they do prefer mono to stereo, and it seems to come up quite a bit among Beatles fans. And my colleague, Mike Schrand, who's STLPR's morning host and a musician himself, noted that Beatles recordings through Sgt. Pepper's were meant to be in mono, but that they were actually mixed in stereo for the American public where stereo systems were becoming more common. And then he added that he grew up with stereo mixes of those very early albums, but he actually prefers the mono mixes of them. So, I mean, what do you make of that? And is this something you hear?
Absolutely. I will actually reference my friend Kevin Mayhew, who I believe Mike Schrand knows.
Okay.
I played him the mono Sgt. Pepper mix and the stereo Sgt. Pepper mix. And he said, the stereo is a good recording, but the mono mix is like being there in the room. And it all comes down to intentionality, I believe, because the story I heard, and I did not hear this from anyone involved, but I've heard repeated many times in the audio space, was that the Beatles spent 7 days in the studio making the mono mix of Sgt. Pepper and creating that final mono master that we have come to know today. And then they left, and in a weekend, the producer and engineer, they said, okay, now go make a stereo version. And so they did a wonderful job. The music sounds great, but it was intended to be one thing. And it was mic'd to be one thing, it was mixed to be one thing, and then when you try and transform it into something else, it becomes a different experience. Mm-hmm. And so specifically in those early Beatles albums, and in fact last year at the Science Center, I played the mono Sgt. Pepper, and people applauded when I was done, which, okay, great. Okay. Love that people got to hear this and loved it. They got to hear the music the way that particular piece of music was intended to be heard. Stereo was advertised as a way to experience a new dimension in music, but not everybody got on the bandwagon at the same time. And so you have this kind of transitional era where, say, classical music and much jazz was recorded with more intentionality for stereo, whereas popular music was primarily limited to AM radio until the late 1960s. And AM radio was mono for most of its entire existence. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the primary market was.
Yeah. That kind of explains how, AM radio feels different. I'm thinking in particular about broadcasts of sports, like
yes.
baseball. It's just interesting to sort of think of it in that way. What accounted for Americans' embrace of stereo versus, across the pond or elsewhere?
I think that there was a concentrated marketing campaign on the part of everybody from the record companies to the equipment companies and it was combined with a mass interest in high fidelity audio, where after World War II, there was more and more interest in getting not just the reception of a recorded radio signal or live radio signal, but an interest in doing it better. And so you started stretching the frequency extremes to have more bass and more treble. And then once that kind of got to a really refined point, the next logical step was to broaden it and create a sound that appealed to all of our hearing senses, so both space and depth. And so both the record companies made content for it and the manufacturers made equipment for it, and the public seemed to grasp onto it because also a lot of stereo albums will be a little bit gimmicky sometimes. There's these like persuasive percussion series that have these really exaggerated stereo pans where, you have bongos on the left and like a xylophone on the right in a way you'd never hear it at a concert, but it was a way to experience stereo on the average home system with speakers maybe 4 feet apart or 5 feet apart and really get a sense of that. And it was a popular thing. So it's a combination of people making content for it and appreciating it for what it can do, and people that were interested in audio, dare I say, a little bit more, because you didn't have, color television as a widespread medium. You didn't have the internet. You really had sound.
Right.
And so all of that came together to create this shift in what people expected.
David Runnell is my guest today. He's a local audiophile and a broadcast engineer. He's also the co-leader of the St. Louis Science Center Sound-Centric Up Late event, a component of that event. It's for adults 21 and up that takes place next Saturday, July 25th. David, we started this segment giving people some advice about using headphones, which you also gave to me. What other kinds of tips would you offer for people to have a rich listening experience?
I would say the biggest thing to have a rich listening experience is intentionality. Whatever you're listening on, so much of it is actually sitting down and listening to it. And one of the things I wanted to bring to the Science Center's Up Late event was the ability to sit down and listen, rather than say, I'm going to have my headphones in while I'm doing work or while I'm driving. And those are all wonderful ways to experience music. But sit down and listen on whatever you have and pay attention to what you're hearing versus using it as a soundtrack to your life. Make it the focal point of what you do. And furthermore, if you hear differences in things, change things and find out why. Move things around. Those are the two big basic things that I can offer everybody.
Yeah. The way that we experience sound, so you said, focus on it, and the also Sprach Zarathustra is something that many people recognize from film. So how did stereo affect the experiences of things like film, where sound is a critical part, not necessarily the only thing?
Stereo really came to the film world in a slightly different form, because film started out as one speaker behind the screen when it got sound. And so the decision was actually to bring it to 3 channels, who had left, center, and right. And so that created the ability to put dialogue in the center and sound effects and music on the sides, or as an effect, you could put, someone speaking off screen, off to the left or right, and then eventually surround and behind you and above you now. And so stereo brought a new dimension in film as well, where you could, again, change the art form and change the way people experienced it and have a new amount of creative control. And so it allows you to add more music and more sound effects, because now you have a dedicated speaker that typically only has dialogue and some sound effects in the center, and then music and mixes are typically for cinema on the left and right. You can now create denser and more nuanced soundscapes. And that really started out in the 1940s with Disney's Fantasia. That was the first kind of roadshow. There was a roadshow release where they built a special sound system in every theater that had 3 screen channels and 1 surround channel behind you. And there were certain controls in the film and automation that actually moved sound around. And that was the first. There's always no first. There's someone that experimented with it before. But really a good point to start out is Disney's Fantasound system of 1940. And that was really kind of the introduction of stereo to a wide audience in the film world.
You will be at the Science Center next Saturday, and this is the second time you've been there. What can people expect at that event?
Well, this year, last year I did something called Origins of Home High Fidelity, and that was Origins of Home Hi-Fi, I called it, and that was the first two products from a company called Marantz and a very extremely early product from a company called Lansing, which became Altec Lansing, and then Lansing himself left to found JBL, which is still in business today. I presented an early speaker from his company that's one of, I believe, 3 known to exist I've been able to prove. This year, I wanted to continue the story of home listening by bringing it to stereo. So last year we had high fidelity, lows and highs and everything in between. This year we have space and depth. And to showcase that, I'm continuing the story of the Marantz company with a vacuum tube Marantz sound system and Acoustic Research AR3A speakers. And the AR3As were actually promoted by Miles Davis in a very famous ad campaign of the early 1970s, who's a St. Louis region, from the St. Louis region. And the idea is to not only show people how records worked in terms of stereo, because you only have one groove. So I wanted to explain how does stereo get into that, and then to play 3 albums that I thought represented the early stereo era well. And one of those is Modest Mussorgsky's Pictures of an Exhibition from it was recorded in 1957 by Fritz Reiner and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. The second one would be Miles Davis's Kind of Blue from 1959. And the third one would be the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour from 1967. So you mentioned earlier that Sgt. Pepper was, and before, is kind of really works better in mono. I listened through to all of them recently, and I thought that Magical Mystery Tour was a great point to kind of capstone. This is where stereo really kind of started to create something I'd consider a more modern sound in that world. And then also 1967 was the last year that the major labels released mono LPs. So it kind of puts a capstone on that as well.
David McReynolds is a local audiophile and broadcast engineer. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can learn more from David and his partner Katie Cahill at Up Late Experience Sound at the St. Louis Science Center on July 25th. For more information about that event and tickets, visit slsc.org.
This episode was produced by Elaine Shaw. Production assistance from our executive producer, Alex Hoyer. Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.